Hi, folks, and welcome to the podcast. So, I'm sure you've probably seen it around about with the public health messaging, but September is Heart Health Awareness Month. So, we're going to be talking about heart health and all the ins and outs of root cause. What does the science say? I'm going to get a little bit sciencey on this one because, I like to indulge in that sort of stuff. Welcome to anyone who doesn't know me or hasn't seen any of my work before. My name is Andy Shepherd. I'm the clinical lead for ReadyCare, or the chief nerd, as my wife likes to say. And in this evening's session, we're going to talk about heart health. So we look at the science up to date, so the science over the last 30 or 40 years, and the lipid heart hypothesis, which is the hypothesis that said that, hypothesis being an important word, that's the objective word there, saying that or the operative word, saying that cholesterol might be at the root cause of heart disease, and cholesterol goes up when you eat saturated fat. So saturated fat, therefore, might be at the root cause of heart disease. Might be. It was a hypothesis which has failed. We know that is not the case. There's plenty of evidence to the contrary. So let's dig into that. Okay, starting with this. Just before I go any further, just to let you know, you might hear some of these concepts, and if it's your first time listening to us, you might say, well, that doesn't make any sense. I thought saturated fat was bad and we need loads of carbs and low fat is great. Spoiler, it's not. And the advice to eat more saturated fat and eggs and stuff like that, you might think, well, is that not contrary to what we used to believe? It is. Now, the reason I'm bringing this up is that these results are the results of interventions where we put patients on a diet that is relatively higher in those saturated fats and eggs and cream and butter and cheese, and lower in processed carbohydrates. And with that sort of a diet, we have seen remission rates of diabetes of about 48%, reversing things like fatty liver, sleep apnea getting better, blood pressure coming down significantly. Every measurable parameter for cardiometabolic health, by that I mean risk of heart disease, getting better and significantly better. So much that we've won something called the International Scholar Award from the American Heart Association, the Clinical Pharmacy Congress Award in the UK for work we did in the NHS, and more recently, our program won the Global Pharma Awards Best Digital Therapeutic. So we're kind of nerds at this stuff. We like the science. So let me go into the ins and outs, and I'll come back out for a couple of questions then if you have them as well. So just understanding, first of all, that the recent clinical literature, I'm just going to glance over this for a second. Actually, I'll come back on camera. So basically, the most important thing to know is that the previously held belief, and I'll explain why. We have somebody called Ansel Keys to thank for this, who caused a whole lot of trouble, because he came up with a hypothesis in the late 70s that said he believed saturated fat and eggs and things like that were at the root cause of heart disease because they increase your cholesterol. There was lots of opposition. Lots of people said, I don't think saturated fat is a problem at all. How could we go 2.4 million years eating an evolutionary and species appropriate diet, and it's suddenly causing us trouble now, but only in the late 70s and only in Western civilization, not in remote tribes around the world, not in the Maasai tribe, the Hadza, the Inuit tribe, the Kikuyu tribe. None of these tribes are not getting heart disease or obesity or Alzheimer's or type 2 diabetes or cancer. So that doesn't seem to make sense. But anyway, that's what happened. So the more recent science, emerging science, indicates high blood sugar levels and something known as hyperinsulinemia. So insulin is a hormone secreted by the pancreas to get your blood sugar levels under control. Hyper just meaning high. Hyperinsulinemic just means that your insulin levels are high. And that appears to be, there's a very strong science that says that appears to be the root cause of heart disease, not cholesterol, not saturated fat. And that should be no surprise to us because, Mother Nature had a plan. Okay, so we look at this sort of research coming out and we think, well, this all muddies the water a lot. So it would have been very simple if cholesterol and saturated fat were bad. You follow a low-fat diet, nobody gets heart disease. Yet heart disease rates are higher than ever before in human history. Following this advice for the last 30 or 40 years, diabetes has gone up. Colorectal cancer, almost all cancers have gone up. Obesity is going up. Although it's leveled off in some parts of the world, but it's been exploding in Western world for the most part. Blood pressure, dyslipidemia, polycystic ovarian syndrome, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, sleep apnea, all of these chronic conditions that are lifestyle related are getting worse and worse and worse and worse, despite 40 years of buying low-fat foods and lots of processed carbohydrate. Now, this paper came out recently, and this has confused a lot of people. I'll go on to explain the reason why it does actually make sense. This showed that high LDL cholesterol, LDL, low-density lipoprotein cholesterol, was previously referred to as bad cholesterol. Now, this paper came out showing a lack of association or an inverse association between LDL cholesterol and mortality. So what does that mean? Well, it means that they're now saying the higher your bad cholesterol goes, the longer you live. When they looked at this meta-analysis of all the trials, bringing together hundreds of thousands of patients, that the higher your cholesterol was and the higher your so-called bad cholesterol, LDL cholesterol, the lower your risk of heart disease. And you think, well, that doesn't make sense because isn't cholesterol a bad thing? I'll come back to that. So let's just take a few steps back here and see, well, what is cholesterol? So cholesterol is a waxy kind of a fat-like substance. It's made by your liver and other places around the body. And you can also get some of it from eating foods. Now, the image is probably misleading because that shows cholesterol building up in your arteries. When you eat cholesterol, it categorically does not just inappropriately clog up your arteries. I mean, nature wouldn't provide us through 2.4 million years of human evolution, a couple of 100,000 years at least. It wouldn't provide us with a food source that we've evolved to eat for a few million years that's trying to kill us. It doesn't make sense. And a really key thing to know is that cholesterol is not the problem. It's a symptom of a disease state. So I say that again. Cholesterol itself is not the problem, meaning that cholesterol from eggs and saturated fat itself is not the problem. The research is very clear on this. Cholesterol is a symptom or a red flag for another inflammatory condition, which is systemic inflammation and insulin resistance primarily. So cholesterol actually comes along to try and repair the site of an insult in an artery. It doesn't just go there to clog it up for the crack just because you ate it. So if we think cholesterol is bad, we would have to answer the question, well, how do we then explain why your liver will make 75 to 80% of the cholesterol in your body? So if you say, I'm not eating a tap of cholesterol anymore, that won't help you, by the way, in terms of cholesterol. It'll do the opposite of anything. But if you say, I'm not going to eat any more cholesterol again, your body will say, that's fine. I'm going to make 80% of the cholesterol that ends up in your blood. So it's not a bad thing. Cholesterol is actually essential for human life. So these are the key kind of functions. It makes up the structural integrity of cell membranes, maintains those cell membranes. It's involved in the production of bile and helps with vitamin absorption. It's a precursor for hormones. So without it, you can't make estrogen, progesterone, cortisol, testosterone. Every single cell in your body requires cholesterol to keep itself alive. And you produce vitamin D, which is massively important for your immune system, as well as hundreds of other physiological roles. When the UVB light hits the skin, cholesterol is involved in making vitamin D. So cholesterol could not be more important. And to say that it's a bad thing and you just want to lower it is madness. Somebody asked me before when I was doing a talk, they said, if I wanted to get my cholesterol, even though I had just argued to the contrary or spoken to the contrary for the previous 40 minutes, he said to me, if I wanted to get my cholesterol way lower, because my doctor's always at me, could I get it to zero? I said, yeah, we'd have a little bit of an issue though. You'd have to die to do it. So you could get your cholesterol to zero, maybe, but you would die on the spot. You'd fall into a bag of jelly on the ground. You do not want your cholesterol to be too low. That actually also increases your risk of heart disease. You certainly don't want zero cholesterol. So we used to believe, or it used to be believed, and many practitioners still lack the knowledge and the knowledge of the new metabolic health literature to understand that it's not all about total cholesterol. So many doctors, if not most, I would probably say, because they're busy and they haven't got time to be checking up all the new science, maybe 90+% of doctors will say your total cholesterol, this one at top here, is too high. You need to go on a cholesterol lowering medication because high cholesterol is correlated with a risk of heart disease. We know now, by the way, it's not. The contrary is true now. So if it's not total cholesterol that's the problem, what part, or LDL cholesterol for that matter, as we saw in that paper, then what part of your cholesterol is a good indicator of cardiometabolic risk? Let me show you. HDL cholesterol, which is commonly referred to as good cholesterol. And on that point, actually, and I'm constantly arguing with myself and cutting myself off. I just get really passionate about this stuff. There's no such thing as good cholesterol. There's no such thing as bad cholesterol. There's no such thing as any type of cholesterol. There is only one type of cholesterol. When we say good cholesterol, we're using a loose term because HDL actually means high density lipoprotein. Lipo meaning fat, protein being protein. A lipoprotein is a carrier for cholesterol. There's only one type of cholesterol. There's no such thing as good or bad cholesterol. But HDL is the protein, the lipoprotein that carries the good cholesterol and is or carries the cholesterol. So it's given the term good cholesterol because it's the lipoprotein that will move cholesterol around the body, and it's correlated. High HDL levels are correlated with low risk of cardiovascular disease. So if your HDL is above kind of 1.3, 1.4, ideally I like to see it above 1.5. Personally, I strive for my own to be about 2.5 or higher. But if you're above 1.5, happy days. HDL cholesterol is good. The higher it goes, the better. Triglycerides are fats that are in your blood. Now, interestingly enough, and completely counterintuitively, if you wanted to get lower levels of fat in your blood, you would eat more fat, not less. You would eat less carbohydrate. The reason your triglycerides build up in the blood has nothing to do with dietary fat, or little or nothing to do with dietary fat. And it has almost everything to do with carbohydrate metabolism dysfunction. So, what I mean by that is, as you eat carbohydrates, your pancreas becomes tired, you become pre diabetic or diabetic. When you do that, what happens is your body says, I can't make enough insulin to lower blood sugar levels. So what I'm going to do is convert glucose, which is sugar, into triglycerides and bring it through the blood as fats. So the triglycerides go into the liver, they go around the body, they stay in your blood, and you see in your blood results that your triglycerides are high. So it's high blood sugar levels that cause your triglycerides to go high, which is bad, and your HDL to go low. Total cholesterol and LDL cholesterol are not accurate indicators of cardiovascular risk at all. Now, again, 9 doctors out of 10 will look at this and say, well, your cholesterol is a bit high, you should go on cholesterol lowering medication, even though the data is more than clear over the last number of years in particular. So, how do we evaluate our risk of heart disease? Now, if a lot of our corporate clients will do health assessments and they'll notice that we use a scoring, a risk scoring system. We don't look at total cholesterol and we don't look at LDL cholesterol for a very good reason. We've researched this obsessively for the last 6 or 7 years, just non-stop learning as much as we can about this sort of stuff so we can consider ourselves experts in it. So what we do look at in terms of your cholesterol levels are HDL. You want your HDL to be um, certainly not below 1.3. You want it to be as high as possible, and then triglycerides. So HDL is good cholesterol. If that is below 1.3 millimoles, that's a bad thing. It's a bad sign. It means your blood sugar levels and your insulin levels are trending high. That's causing your HDL to go down, and it's a risk factor for something known as metabolic syndrome. Same thing if your triglycerides are above 1.8. So these are the key things to look out for with your health. Please, please believe me when I say your total cholesterol is far, far less important. Your total being the number, the 5 or the 6 or the 7, far less important than the breakdown within that number. So, metabolic syndrome is a cluster of risk factors for heart disease that appear together. And they do appear together in a cluster. It's pretty rare only to have two. You'd be more likely to have 3 or 4 or 5. They all come together. And the reason they come together in that cluster is because they're caused by the same thing. High blood sugar levels lead to high levels of a hormone in the body called insulin. Insulin causes weight gain around the midsection. It causes your triglycerides to go up. It causes your HDL to go down. It causes your blood pressure to go up. Insulin causes blood pressure to go up through something called endothelin 1, which is a vasoconstrictor, constricts your blood vessels, and diminished release of something called nitric oxide. So without getting too sciencey, high insulin levels from your blood sugar levels being high cause high blood pressure, cause your HDL to go low, cause you to gain weight around the midsection, cause your triglycerides to go high, and of course your blood sugar levels are high. That is metabolic syndrome. Learn about this, understand these numbers. If you do, and if you lower down your carb and sugar intake and you see all of these things going in the right direction, you can potentially save your life. So this is really interesting. We look at, and apologies for the way the slide came across there, it's just on the streaming software I'm using, but we look at these guys and we say, well, if red meat and saturated fat and eggs and all this sort of stuff, fatty foods, if these are bad for us, then where's the heart disease epidemic in remote tribes around the world? What's going on there? How are these guys an anomaly? And the answer is they're not an anomaly. They're eating a species appropriate diet that promotes optimal health, and they don't have processed food. They get out and they get more vitamin D. One myth that I want to bust here now is that the reason these guys don't get cancer and heart disease is because they're out hunting all the time. Not true. So even if you look at the females who predominantly stay at home and take care of the kids, if you look at elders who can't exercise or they've got injuries, if you look at infirm or people who've had head traumas and are in wheelchairs, there is no heart disease, no cancer, no diabetes, no Alzheimer's. It's exceptionally, exceptionally rare, except in maybe a genetic anomaly. Compare that to 1 in 10 individuals over the age of 65 in the US have Alzheimer's. About 46%, according to a recent report, of people in the US either have pre-diabetes or type 2 diabetes, almost 1 in 2. So, I mean, that is shocking compared to, again, in remote tribes where it's almost non-existent. So the reason I say that that's not true is because they've looked at studies where they take 40 or 50 members of the Inuit tribe. They did an amazing study on this actually about 6 or 7 years ago, and they moved them over to the States. And the point of the study was to show there's something unique about these guys that they don't get sick because they're eating all this meat and these eggs and this cheese. So they brought them over to the States and they had to call off the experiment 6 or 8 months in because they were getting so sick. They were getting pre-diabetes, fatty liver, high blood pressure, obesity. They were getting depressed. They were having neurological issues. They were getting joint pain. So they had to just call off the study on ethical and moral grounds and bring them back over. So they're not a genetic anomaly. In fact, the opposite. They get sicker quicker than we do in the Western world because the genetics haven't had time to catch up with the way we eat. We've got some resilience towards it. So this is the kind of nail in the coffin in terms of the idea that saturated fat is just bad for your heart health and might increase your risk of cardiovascular disease. The largest ever meta-analysis of prospective cohort studies looking at the association of saturated fat with cardiovascular disease. So let me just break that down because these papers tend to use all these fancy kind of words. Basically, prospective cohort studies just means studies where they bring together lots and lots of people. They're randomized controlled trials, usually meaning one group doesn't eat much saturated fat, the other one does, and you kind of randomly allocate them to 2 separate groups and control the results. Meta-analysis of prospect cohort studies means you take an analysis of all the big studies together. So you take all the ones that had more than 10 or 15,000 people and were well done and well controlled, you put them together and you've about 200,000 people. The conclusions from the largest ever meta-analysis in saturated fat by independent researchers found that there is no significant evidence for concluding that dietary saturated fat increases your risk of heart disease, i.e., cream in your coffee, butter, bacon, eggs, cheese, red meat, full fat dairy do not increase your risk of cardiovascular disease. And a consensus statement from the American College of Cardiology to the same effect came out 2 years ago, where they said whole fat sources of complex matrix saturated fat, saturated rich fatty acids foods, so basically animal foods, do not increase your risk of cardiovascular disease. So if it's not saturated fat, and it's not, if it's not cholesterol, dietary cholesterol, and it's not, what does increase your risk for heart disease? And this is a key study. I would love everybody to know about this study. I really wish it was out in the mainstream media, but for some reason it doesn't seem to make any noise. I'll let you decide why that is. So this is a study following middle-aged men in, I think it was the Middle East, and they were middle-aged men, and it's a huge number. I think it was 8,000 or 9,000 over 30 or 40 years. And what they did was anyone who got had a heart attack was included in the study. So 10 or 15,000 males, middle-aged males, and they followed them for 35 or 40 years. And they wanted to see if we measure their blood metrics every year, what will predict having the next heart attack? Now, according to the old lipid heart hypothesis, which said saturated fat and cholesterol are the issue, and maybe they're causing heart disease. Again, it was called a hypothesis, not anything else, because it was never proven. According to that, then high total cholesterol surely would have been a problem. Now, if your cholesterol was 5, or if it was 9, or 10, or 12, it made no difference to your risk of having a heart attack. So when my doctor said to me, and this unfortunately for my doctor did happen, my doctor said to me, oh, everything looks amazing in your bloods. You look really healthy. And he came to one page and he said, oh, actually your cholesterol is high. It's 7. And I said, yeah. And he said, well, that, increased risk of heart disease. And I said, how? I said, what do you mean how? It's the cholesterol builds up in your arteries. And I said, but there's plenty of research to the contrary. And I quoted all the literature and he stopped me and he said, what Can I ask you a question? He said, what do you do for a living? And I said, I teach this kind of stuff, have a podcast and treat this sort of stuff and cardiometabolic issues of patients. And he said, and nobody knows who my doctor is because he's a new doctor, and I quote, look, I don't really know what I'm talking about. It's just if your cholesterol is over 5, we're told to put you on a statin. That's our protocol, is what he said. So I quoted this study, which he was, to be fair, fascinated by and asked for more information. Cholesterol over 5 did not increase your risk for cardiovascular disease. Even more surprisingly to many of the researchers, a high so-called bad cholesterol, LDL cholesterol, and that shouldn't be called bad cholesterol, by the way. It's neither good nor bad. It depends on the level of oxidation within the particles themselves. And it's sugar that causes the oxidation. High so-called bad cholesterol did not increase your risk for a second heart attack. So if you were someone on the study who had a cholesterol of 4 and the LDL cholesterol was 1, most doctors would be delighted through the old way of looking at things. Or you were somebody who had a total cholesterol of 9 and the LDL cholesterol was 6, and your doctor would be having panic stations about that. It made no difference to your risk of heart attacks, whether you were either of those profiles. If you had high blood pressure, it doubled your risk for a heart attack. If your blood sugar levels were high, like pre-diabetes, type 2 diabetes, if you didn't have those under control, and you had high levels of insulin, you were at a 7-fold, almost 7-fold, 6.7%, 6.7-fold, so 670% increased chance of having a heart attack. You were pretty much guaranteed you were going to have a heart attack. So the average person has a 2 or 3% risk of a heart attack over any given 5 to 10 years. Your risk was now 35-40% if you had high insulin. So let's go back to the question, what is at the root cause of heart disease? It's pretty clear from the literature. Saturated fat has been exonerated in terms of the idea that saturated fat just increases your risk for cardiovascular disease and we should all eat low-fat foods. Listen, that has failed as a national eating strategy for the last 30 or 40 years. We can't keep repeating the same rhetoric over and over again and getting worse and worse results. It's like that quote, insanity is repeating the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. It should be no surprise to us, given all of this literature, that, and I always say this to my patients, that it turns out Mother Nature is not a psychopath. God, whoever you believe in, whether it's Mother Nature or, otherwise, has a plan. Foods, as they're presented in nature, whole foods promote optimal health. So what we've done is, and you'll see a lot of talks on YouTube to this nature as well, we've blamed salt, cholesterol, saturated fat, and red meat, all at different times and in varying degrees, for what sugar, processed carbohydrate, and industrial seed oils were doing. If you want to have a healthy heart, if you want to reduce your risk of stroke, look at your blood sugar levels, look at your insulin levels, look at your levels of inflammation. Avoid seed oils and processed foods. Avoid breads, cereals, granola bars, rice, pasta, frozen pizzas, Ben and Jerry's. Eat more meat, eggs, cheese, dairy, full fat dairy, by the way, never low fat, including cream. I know it's hard to get your head around. And basically buy single ingredient foods. So walk around your supermarket on the outskirts and rarely go into the inside aisles. When we go into the supermarkets, actually, we almost never go to the inside aisles. We'll start off at the meat counter, we'll go to the fish counter, we'll go to dairy, we'll pick up the butter, we'll get some yogurt, and then we'll get fruits and vegetables. And for the most part, we're done. We might get coffee or something. My son ran through the supermarket aisle and he picked up a box and he was shaking. He said, "Can we get this?" And I said, "What is it?" And he said, "I don't know. Can we get it?" And it was a cereal box with Paw Patrol on it, but he didn't know what cereal was because he's never eaten it. So avoid the inner aisles, shop on the outskirts, eat single ingredient foods. I leave it at that. Guys, thanks so much. It's something that I'm really passionate about, heart health. And I just want people to have the right information and the kind of cutting edge science on it. Thanks so much for your time. I really appreciate you guys being here, and we'll see you soon. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.